Cool. So we're good to start. I'm Shruti, and I am part of the Moveworks team, but I'm here on behalf of Kestra to present to you a topic on Kestra real-time triggers. So firstly, we will talk about what is Kestra, right? So Kestra is a modern orchestration platform. Now, you might have heard about orchestration platforms. To begin with, like a decade ago, we had old orchestration platforms like Azkaban, Luigi, Uzi, and then later on came the new set of orchestration platforms like Airflow, then came Daxter, Prefect. Airflow was something which was very widely adopted as an orchestration platform by multiple companies. But then over a period of time, people started realizing that it's pretty difficult to manage Airflow. So there were different problems like you cannot directly write onto Airflow. The previous one. Previous one. So there were problems like on Airflow, you had to write it in your different editor and then push it onto some file system or onto GitHub. And then Airflow used to pick it up from there. It used to take time to refresh. Then that is where you would test out. Then if there are any changes, you again go back to your editor, make the changes. And it was like a pretty problematic stuff. Then it was very much adhered to the Python version that Airflow was working on. So if you want to run something which is on a different version of Python, then it was again a big problematic stuff to get that thing done. And there were many such more problems. That is where people thought that orchestration should not be that difficult of a problem to solve. And then came this new set of orchestration platforms. One of them being Kestra. There are a few more like Mage and others, but Kestra is something which has got a very good adoption, especially it's a European company, so a lot of other European companies have started adopting Kestra, and it has a very good response from customers. So let me tell my role. So I am an open source contributor at Kestra. It's an open source code base. And along with some open source contribution, I am also a professional blog writer over there. I've contributed multiple blogs. So the first one which I've highlighted is about the real-time triggers that I had recently posted, as it says, 9 days ago. And then there are a few other blogs which I have contributed to Kestra. So let us understand some of the good features that Kestra brings to the table. And if you or your company is exploring orchestration platforms, and if they want to if they are trying out and doing POCs on different orchestration platforms, then I would definitely suggest giving Kestra a try. So here we don't use any specific code language. We use the notation language, YAML, markup language, for denoting the workflows. So in the Airflow world, you have DAGs. The DAG equivalents here are flows or workflows. And the way we do it is we specify the ID of the flow, then the namespace. Namespace is just a categorization. And then we define the tasks. Tasks together make up the directed acyclic graph. And then you also have triggers. So we will get into this in a little more detail. So the first, if you see, it's for every task, you specify the ID and the type of the task. There are different types that are supported. So here is an example wherein I'm requesting and I'm making a HTTP request call for one of the URIs. So URI becomes an attribute over there. Then second is where I'm writing a Python script, and then I'm loading the response from Python from whatever I received into some BigQuery table. Triggers, we will hold on for now. I'll discuss it a bit later. Now you can write directly on the UI itself. You don't have to switch between editors, like you have a separate Kestra and then you have a separate editor and then you mix and match. That's not the case. Kestra UI itself provides you the editor. So as and when you type, you also see things that are happening, the way the DAG is getting structured, and then you can run it right then and there, and you would see the logs. You can go back to the tab where you have the editor within the Kestra platform itself, and you can make changes. So you can have these tasks arranged in whatever fashion you want. If you just keep on providing the tasks, it is sequential. Then you have a task called as parallel. And then within that, if you write the task, it would all run in parallel and so on. So anything and everything that an orchestration platform provides is available in Kestra. The UI is pretty advanced. It has auto completion, it has syntax validation. So here is an example where you are writing the type and it specifies all the available types that are present. And then if there is any syntax problem, it would highlight right away that, okay, this doesn't look to be a correct syntax. And as it also has its own code editor. In the sense, Flow is something which anyways you will be able to write. But let's say you have a Python script that you want to run. For writing the Python script, you don't have to go anywhere. You can just see that you have different tabs over here. You can write a Python file, R file, whatever file that you want. And then in one of the tasks, you can refer to that file. And then it comes with a complete dashboard stating the different executions that took place, how many of them were successful, how many of them failed, anything having a warning. And it by default gives you most of the graphs which are useful, like the executions that took place today, yesterday, last 30 days, and so on. Things like this makes it pretty easy to figure out if there are errors in your executions, and you can quickly go and take a look at what went wrong. It comes with a rich set of plugins. So basically from the tasks, you can call any of the plugins. There are plugins associated with cloud provider services, then with different databases, data stores, and much more. So let us take a quick demo of how Kestra works. So this is the Kestra UI. This is how your landing page looks like. Then here, to begin with, there is nothing. So this is a landing page dashboard. This is where you would write the flows. These are some of the default flows that comes. Let me quickly type a hello world flow. So we gave the ID, we gave the namespace, and the task is pretty simple. We are using the log type. I hope it is visible. I can just zoom in. Okay, so we are just stating that I want to log hello world. I save it, and that's about it. I execute it over here. I say execute, and it executed, gave out the log hello world. So you can see the executions pretty straightforwardly over here. If anything goes wrong, I just go back to the editor, make the changes, and come back. So you see the dashboard at the flow level, you see dashboard at the overall level, and then you have executions, logs, then blueprints, like some of the existing flows pertaining to anything. Let's say you want to write a flow having a task related to S3, but you don't know how to write one. You can just select S3 and you have a lot of sample S3 related flows that are given to you. And then this is the rich set of plugins that it has got, and so on. So this is how powerful Kestra is. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to leave the Kestra UI. Everything can be done here. It easily integrates with GitHub, so you can write and push out your flows to Git and handle everything from Kestra itself. So let us cover something about flows and tasks. As I said, flow is equivalent to your DAG in Airflow. And then tasks are individual units of execution that you will define. And then is the concept of triggers. So what is trigger? So if you want something to be scheduled on a regular basis, or if you want some flow to run whenever some of the condition gets true, that is where you use trigger. In this case, I've shown an example of a cron trigger, where you say that at a particular regular interval, the flow should get triggered. Here I have used the cron of every 1 minute. So every 1 minute, the flow will get triggered and executed. Then triggers are not just specific to regular schedules, but if something happens somewhere, then a flow should get executed. So it could be a database or a data store, or it could be messaging systems. So for example, in a trigger, you can have a query which will run on a database on regular interval. And if it satisfies that, if it returns you a result, then this particular flow will get triggered. Here is an example where I've given an event hub, which is a messaging system of Azure. And whenever there are messages in the event hub, you will have this flow getting triggered. Now, if you take a look, the type is event hubs.trigger, and you specify an interval. Here I have specified the interval of 60 seconds. The minimum that you can specify is 30 seconds. So whatever messages comes in that interval would get processed every 60 seconds. So this flow will get triggered every 60 seconds, and it will check if there are any new messages that have come in the last 60 seconds. And then using those messages, this flow will get triggered. Now, this was a pretty good feature, and it solved most of the problems. But then few customers came back that we cannot wait for 30 seconds. For example, one of the examples could be a fraud detection system, wherein if there is a transaction which we get to know that it's a fraud transaction, then you cannot wait 30 seconds to block that transaction. Maybe the transaction might go through. So this is where the customers of Kestra wanted that something should get triggered immediately as and when an event happens. And this is where came the concept of real-time triggers. So this is where if you see the type has changed to real-time trigger, and there is no interval given. So there is a continuous thread running in the background, which just keeps on listening to any messages. And as soon as it receives any message, it will start this flow, and you can get everything that has come in the message of the event hub using trigger.body. So, and you can take further action from there on. So this is a pretty powerful feature that Kestra introduced it in its most recent version of 0.17. And yeah, it has got a pretty good response from the customers. So that's all about the demo. I can give about the real-time triggers. Let us now actually see it in action. So I will go to flows, create a new flow. So this is the same flow that we discussed, and there are no executions. What I will do is, if you see, here the event hub name is test in namespace Mantri namespace. So this is that test, and let me give a message, hello world, to it, and say send. Okay, the message got sent, and let's come here, let's go to executions and see it has already executed it. So immediately, as soon as any message comes in, it will trigger the flow, and immediately you can have that flow executed. So yeah, so this is something which is pretty powerful. And one of the major things which you can do with triggers and real-time triggers is you no longer have to go to the Lambda equivalent services of the cloud providers. You don't have to go to AWS Lambda, or you don't have to go to Azure Functions to write such kind of scripts, one-off scripts, which should get triggered when something happens somewhere. So as an orchestration platform, you can leverage the same platform to handle all those use cases. So yeah, that's all about Kestra. Do you have any questions on this talk? Yeah, go ahead. So you can edit the code and then you can sync it on GitHub. Whenever you are done, like, okay, this is like your final piece of code, then you just push it to GitHub.
Got it. So it's stored on the disk, not in the metadata database equivalent.
No, it's stored on the disk. So you can regularly keep on syncing.
Got it. Also, another question. So Airflow has this thing. I understand here we define the tag or the flow in YAML versus in Python in Airflow. So one thing is like Airflow supports the dynamic map task. So like, let's say I have a task. I get the output using task instance, and dynamically I can create, let's say, 10 steps in the next one. 10 tasks depending on the output of the first task, I can create dynamically X number of tasks. Is YAML powerful are we able to express such cases in YAML?
Yes, we can. So basically the types that I have shown you, there are types using which you can run a for loop and so on. So you can take an output from one task, put it into another, and then iterate over that particular output using the for loop kind of equivalent tasks.
Got it. Thanks.
So Airflow has branching logic condition handling. So can you share how do you handle that in case of Kestra?
Yes, so there is a switch branch, there is a if branch. All the branches are available. Let me just quickly show it to you. So I'll just go to the docs and so here is an example of a conditional switching. It takes the input string and it's a switch case kind of. So if you see, the type is flow.switch, and based on the input string, it can switch first, second, third. And there is also an if equivalent task, which can just do conditional branching based on if.
Okay. And Airflow has this concept of executors wherein you can configure Celery executor or Kubernetes executor. So in this case, how do you handle the compute part? Is it all in the Kestra or how is it that handled?
No, so what you can do over here is you have something called as task runner. And then you can say on what environment do you want to run this task. You can have a Docker runner, you can have a Kubernetes runner, but that is specific to that task. So for that task, that would specifically spawn a Docker container and run that task in that container. So I think one of the example which I had was in the presentation itself, wherein this Python script is running using a Docker runner in this particular image. So firstly, a Docker container will get spawned with that image, and then the Python script will get run.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Which means that the real-time event-based system for the workflow to execute. So it seems like a push-based system, which is good. But my question is around, is there a way to specify a pull-based workflow? For example, a thread which polls a database at some frequency and
Right. So that is the trigger part, which I said before, real-time triggers. So that trigger, the minimum duration is 60 seconds by default. You can change that duration to 5 minutes, 1 minute, whatever you want. And at that regular cadence, it will trigger your database with the query that you give. Or it will even poll messaging system if it is used with messaging systems and so on, just like I showed for Event Hub trigger. So it will poll on that regular interval. And then if there are any results that you get, then it will start the flow with that result.
got it. So what's the minimum frequency?
The minimum that you can go is 30 seconds.
Thank
you. Yeah. Yes, it's open source. Sorry, I didn't get it. Yes, so it has an enterprise edition as well. So you get some extra features with enterprise edition, like, for example, you get user administration with enterprise edition. So you can have users, you can have groups, you can have that complete RBAC functionality on the enterprise edition, but that is not present on the open source one. So they do have an enterprise edition, and you get lot of good functionalities associated with the enterprise and the enterprise solution.
So we at ShareChat use a lot of Airflow. I'm still not getting the features that are there in this product that will help us. Why should I go for this? Like, what's very distinguishing from Airflow that would that I should adopt this product? Because I'm looking from that angle, actually.
Sure. So it's not that something that I'm advertising it or anything, or I'm forcing you.
No, of
It's
course, I just
yeah.
want to
So
know.
it's something which I can tell you from my personal experience that I liked out of Kestra rather than with Airflow is firstly, it's very intuitive. You don't have to go in search of a lot of things. So one of the things which I'll tell you which is pretty straightforward is, let's say you're typing about this real-time trigger. I think I'll have to zoom out for explaining this. So as soon as I typed this real-time trigger as the type, a documentation opened up right here, giving an example and all the properties that are possible to give. If I change it to, let's say, trigger. So this changed to trigger. And now here I can quickly take a look up to all of it. Another thing which I found it difficult with Airflow was you cannot write, you don't have such intuitive stuff in Airflow. You have to use your own editor, like a VS Code editor or some Golang or PyCharm. There you go ahead and write your Airflow DAG. You cannot test it as well. At the most, what you can do is you can test a flow by writing a test case for your, sorry, not the flow, the task. And by writing the test case for your task, if your task is something which is like a Python task or something, Python operator, basically.
Sure.
Because that's the most granular level you can go. If you want to run out a complete DAG, you don't have an option. You have to put it in your system, sync it with Airflow. It appears in Airflow after 30 seconds or so. Then you run it. Then if there are some changes, you come back to your editor, do the change, wait again for 60 minutes, 60 seconds for it to reflect, and then you do it. So it's like a it's not a very developer-friendly experience. It ends up taking a lot of your time. So that is one problem. Then let's say you have your Airflow is on Python 3.9, but you have some Python code which is on 2.7. Now, if you want to run a task which is having a Python code written in 2.7, it's not straightforward. Behind the scene, you will have to put in queues and direct that queue to some version, to some containers which are on 2.7, and then you run it. So it's a pretty hassle. It's a lot of hassle. It's not just a change of code. It's a change of infrastructure that you have to do. So for such things, what you do over here is you have, this thing itself. So you have the Docker image, right? So in the Docker image, you can say install Python 2.7 and run the script. And it's pretty straightforward. So there are a lot of such hassles here and there, which Airflow is not capable of doing. Yet another example I can give you. So if in Python operator itself, you want to do a lot of things, so you use Python operator for basic Python task. But then if you want to diverge a little bit as well, then you have to go to Python virtual env operator. Then you have one more such operator with Python. And then you have to keep on figuring out the right operators. So all that is sorted out. So it's much easier that way.
I have another follow-up question. So we also use temporal for application-based workflows. So is it only for database ETL-based workflows, or does it also solve for application or infrastructure-based workflows?
It also solves for infrastructure-based workflows. It has a plugin for Ansible. It has plugin for Terraform, and a few more. So you can run your Ansible scripts. You can run your Terraform scripts using Kestra.
Okay, thanks.
You can have change data capture. So there are operators associated with change data capture. So you have Debezium operator basically. So there are Debezium MySQL, Debezium Postgres, and Microsoft SQL Server. So this will give you CDC out of the box, but you can also do CDC right from any of the databases by using the trigger associated with that database. Thank you, everyone.